What would it take for someone who built their entire career on science and evidence to suddenly believe in the impossible? Dr. Marcus Chen spent 23 years in emergency medicine. 23 years of blood, broken bones, and brutal reality. He'd seen death more times than he could count. He'd witnessed suffering that would break most people. And through it all, he never once saw anything that couldn't be explained by biology, chemistry, or simple human error. Faith, to him, wasn't just absent. It was irrelevant. Prayer was what families did in waiting rooms while he did the actual work of saving lives. Religion was a comfort mechanism, he'd say. Nothing more. The human brain seeking patterns where there were none. Hope dressed up as truth. But on a cold November night in 2019, everything Marcus thought he knew about reality shattered in a single moment. And what happened in that emergency room would not only change his life, it would challenge everything modern medicine claims to understand. This is the true story of the miracle that converted an atheist doctor to faith. Marcus Chen wasn't raised religious. His parents were academics. His father, a physicist. His mother, a mathematician. Dinner conversations in his childhood home revolved around logic puzzles and the scientific method. When other kids learned Bible stories, Marcus learned about Newton's laws and the periodic table. Medical school only reinforced his worldview. Every symptom had a cause. Every disease had a mechanism. The human body was an incredibly complex machine, yes, but still just a machine. Beautiful, elegant, intricate, but entirely explainable. His colleagues knew him as brilliant, but cold. Dr. Chen doesn't sugarcoat, the nurses would warn new residents. When families asked him to pray with them, he'd politely decline and return to work. He wasn't cruel about it. He simply saw it as irrelevant, like being asked to consult an astrology chart while reading an MRI. But there was something else about Marcus that most people didn't know. Deep down, beneath the confidence and the certainty, there was a wound. His younger sister had died when he was 17. Leukemia. He'd watched her suffer for 8 months. Watched his parents pray desperately, watched absolutely nothing change. She died anyway, and every prayer went unanswered. That's when Marcus made his choice. He would trust only what he could prove, only what he could see, only what he could fix with his own 2 hands. November 14th, 2019. 11:47 p.m. Marcus was finishing a brutal 14-hour shift when the call came in. Major vehicle collision on the interstate. Multiple casualties incoming. EMS reported at least 3 critical patients. Marcus grabbed his 4th coffee of the night and headed to the trauma bay. The first 2 patients were stabilized quickly. Broken bones, lacerations, concussions. Serious, but survivable. Then they brought in the 3rd patient, a young woman, maybe 25 years old, and Marcus knew immediately that she wouldn't make it. The damage was catastrophic. Massive internal bleeding, collapsed lung, severe head trauma. Her vital signs were barely registering. By every metric Marcus knew, she should have already been dead. The paramedics had coded her twice in the ambulance. They'd brought her back both times, but it was temporary. Marcus had seen this pattern hundreds of times before. The body was shutting down. This was the end. He called it. Time of death, 12:19 a.m. The monitors went flat. The room went quiet. Marcus pulled off his gloves and prepared to notify the family. Just another tragedy on just another night. He'd learned long ago not to take it personally. You can't save everyone. That's medicine. But then something impossible happened. As Marcus turned to leave the trauma bay, one of the nurses, an older woman named Patricia who'd worked there for 30 years, remained by the patient's bedside. Her head was bowed, her lips were moving silently. She was praying. Marcus felt a flash of irritation. The patient was gone. This was just denial, he thought, but Patricia kept praying, her hand resting gently on the young woman's arm. Other staff members had started to clean up, preparing to move the body. The standard protocol. Then the monitor beeped, just once. Everyone froze. Marcus spun around. The heart monitor showed a single blip. Then nothing. Then another blip. Then another. That's electrical artifact, Marcus muttered, stepping closer. The machine is malfunctioning. But the rhythm continued. Weak. Irregular. But undeniably there. A heartbeat where there should be none. Marcus grabbed a stethoscope, his hands suddenly shaking. He pressed it to her chest, and he heard it. Faint, but real. Her heart was beating. "Get me a crash cart! Now!" His voice cut through the stunned silence. The room erupted back into action. Nurses scrambled. Equipment rolled in. But Marcus couldn't move. He stood there, stethoscope still pressed to her chest, listening to a heart that had been stopped for nearly 3 minutes. A heart that every textbook, every study, every shred of his training said should not, could not, be beating. The next 6 hours were the most intense of Marcus's career. The young woman, her name was Sarah Mitchell, shouldn't have survived the next 6 minutes, let alone 6 hours. Her injuries were too severe. She'd lost too much blood. Her brain had been without oxygen for too long. But she kept breathing, her heart kept beating. And slowly, impossibly, she began to stabilize. Marcus worked with mechanical precision, but his mind was reeling. He kept checking the monitors, convinced they were wrong, convinced this was some kind of error. But every test confirmed the same impossible truth. Sarah was alive. By dawn, she was stable enough to move to ICU, still critical, still on a ventilator, still with a long road ahead, but alive. The entire trauma team was buzzing with confusion and awe. "I've never seen anything like it," one of the senior residents kept repeating. Marcus went to the chapel on the 3rd floor. He told himself he was just looking for quiet, somewhere to think. But deep down, he knew why he was really there. The room was empty. Small wooden pews faced a simple altar. Early morning light filtered through stained glass windows. And for the first time in 23 years, Dr. Marcus Chen didn't know what to believe. He sat in the back pew, his head in his hands. "I don't understand," he whispered to the empty room. Maybe to himself. Maybe to something more. "I don't understand what happened. The science was clear. Sarah should be dead. Every physiological principle pointed to one outcome. But she wasn't dead. She was upstairs, breathing, her heart beating steadily, against all odds, against everything he knew. And in that moment, in that quiet chapel, Marcus felt something crack open inside him. Not certainty, not answers, but the possibility, the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was more to reality than what he could measure and explain. Marcus became obsessed. Over the next few weeks, he pored over Sarah's medical records. He reviewed every test, every scan, every measurement. He consulted with colleagues across the country, sending anonymized case files to specialists in cardiology, neurology, trauma surgery. The responses were always the same. "This doesn't make sense. The data must be wrong. There's no medical explanation for this survival." But the data wasn't wrong. Marcus had triple-checked everything. The facts were undeniable. Sarah had been clinically dead. Her heart had stopped. Her brain had been deprived of oxygen. By every measure, irreversible damage should have occurred. Except it hadn't. Sarah woke up 3 weeks after the accident. No brain damage, no cognitive impairment. Her injuries healed at a rate that stunned her physicians. Within 2 months, she walked out of the hospital. 6 months later, she was completely recovered. Marcus visited her during her recovery. He needed to understand. "Do you remember anything?" he asked. "From when your heart stopped?" Sarah smiled. A gentle, knowing smile. "I remember light," she said softly. "And I remember feeling like I had a choice, like I could stay or I could go back. and something told me it wasn't my time yet, that there was more I needed to do. She paused, then looked directly at Marcus. I remember someone praying for me. I couldn't see her, but I could feel it, like a hand pulling me back. Patricia, the nurse who'd stayed and prayed while everyone else had moved on. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, not quite belief, not yet, but something like openness. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Marcus's life. His entire identity had been built on rationality, on evidence, on the firm foundation of scientific materialism. Now that foundation was cracking and he didn't know what would take its place. He stopped sleeping well. He'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment in the trauma bay. The flat line, the prayer, the impossible heartbeat. He started pulling up research on near-death experiences, on cases of spontaneous healing, on the intersection of faith and medicine. Studies he would have dismissed as pseudoscience just months earlier. His colleagues noticed the change. "You okay, Chen?" they'd ask. "You seem distracted." He'd brush them off. But the truth was, he felt like he was losing his mind. Or maybe, for the first time in his life, he was actually finding it. One night, alone in his apartment, Marcus broke down. The walls he'd built around his heart, the walls that had protected him since his sister's death, finally crumbled. And in the midst of his tears, he did something he never thought he'd do. He prayed. Not eloquently, not with confidence, just a desperate whisper into the darkness. "If you're there, if any of this is real, I need to know. I need help. I can't do this alone anymore." And in the silence that followed, Marcus felt something. Not a voice, not a vision, just a presence. A sense of peace that seemed to come from somewhere beyond himself. It was subtle. It was gentle. But it was unmistakably real. Marcus started attending church. It felt awkward at first, like learning a new language in his 40s. But he kept going. He started reading, not just religious texts, but accounts of other doctors, other scientists who'd experienced similar crises of faith. He learned about Francis Collins, the geneticist who led the Human Genome Project and was also a devout Christian. About Eben Alexander, the neurosurgeon who'd had a near-death experience that changed his understanding of consciousness. About countless others who'd found that science and faith weren't enemies, but different ways of seeking truth. 6 months after Sarah's miracle, Marcus was baptized. He wept through the entire ceremony. Tears for his sister, finally released after decades. Tears for all the years he'd spent so certain, so closed off. Tears of gratitude for the impossible event that had cracked him open. His practice changed too. He still relied on science, his training, his expertise, his diagnostic skills. But now he also saw his patients as more than just bodies. He started praying with families when they asked. He started acknowledging the mystery in medicine, the cases that defied explanation, the healings that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his scalpel and prescriptions. "I used to think medicine was about controlling outcomes," he now says, "but I've learned it's about being present to mystery, about doing everything we can with the knowledge we have, while staying humble enough to recognize there's so much we don't understand." Here's what we know scientifically about Sarah's case. It shouldn't have happened. Cardiac arrest lasting more than 5 minutes typically results in irreversible brain damage. Sarah's heart was stopped for at least 3 minutes after being pronounced dead, and that's not counting the 2 times she'd coded in the ambulance. The medical literature is full of studies on survival rates, on oxygen deprivation, on the cascade of cellular death that occurs when blood stops flowing to the brain. Sarah defied all of it. Marcus has presented her case at medical conferences. Some doctors nod knowingly. They've seen their own unexplained cases. Others dismiss it as incomplete data or misdiagnosis. But no one can provide a satisfactory medical explanation, and Marcus has stopped needing one. Science is how we understand the mechanisms, he explains. But sometimes we witness outcomes that transcend those mechanisms. That doesn't make science wrong. It just means science isn't the only lens for viewing reality. He's careful to note that not every prayer is answered the way we want. He still loses patience. He still faces families devastated by loss. His faith doesn't give him magical healing powers or guarantee miracles. But it gives me perspective, he says. It reminds me that healing isn't always about the body. Sometimes the miracle is peace in the midst of suffering. Sometimes it's finding meaning in loss. And sometimes, in rare and precious moments, it's a heartbeat where there should be none. Sarah's survival had other consequences Marcus never anticipated. She became a nurse, specifically because of her experience. I was given a second chance, she says. I want to be the kind of person who fights for others the way people fought for me. She now works in the same hospital where Marcus saved her life. They occasionally cross paths in the hallways, and there's always a moment of recognition, two people bound by an impossible night and an unexplainable outcome. Patricia, the nurse who prayed, still works in the ER. She's never made a big deal of what happened. I just did what I always do, she says simply. I leave room for God to work. But her example changed Marcus's entire approach to medicine. He started a support group at the hospital for medical professionals struggling with faith questions. Doctors, nurses, technicians, people who work in a world of evidence but who've witnessed things that evidence can't explain. The group meets once a month. They share stories. They ask hard questions. They create space for doubt and certainty to coexist. It's become one of the most meaningful parts of Marcus's work, helping others navigate the intersection of science and spirituality that he once thought was impossible. Today, Dr. Marcus Chen still practices emergency medicine. He's still excellent at his job, maybe better than before because he brings his whole self to his work now. But he's also become an unlikely voice for a different kind of conversation in medicine. We've created a false dichotomy, he argues, as if you have to choose between rational thought and spiritual openness, as if science and faith are enemies. But the greatest scientists in history, Newton, Galileo, Pascal, saw their work as exploring the mind of God. He's written articles, given talks, not proselytizing, he's careful about that, but simply sharing his story, describing what happened that November night, admitting that he doesn't have all the answers, but that he's learned to be comfortable with mystery. The miracle wasn't just Sarah's survival, Marcus reflects. The miracle was what it revealed to me, that the universe is bigger, stranger, and more wonderful than I'd allowed myself to believe, that there's room for both stethoscopes and prayers, for both CAT scans and compassion, for both evidence and faith. He pauses, then adds, I spent decades being certain about what wasn't possible. Now I'm learning to be amazed by what is. The story of Marcus Chen and Sarah Mitchell is just one story. One impossible moment in one emergency room on one November night. But it represents something bigger, a question that every human being eventually faces. Is the material world all there is? Or is there something more? Marcus doesn't claim to have definitive answers. He's still a doctor, still a scientist, still someone who values evidence and reason. But he's also now someone who's experienced something that transcends explanation, who's witnessed the impossible, who's learned that sometimes the most rational thing you can do is admit that rationality has limits. Sarah is alive today, laughing, working, loving, living. By every scientific principle, she shouldn't be. But she is. And that fact continues to challenge everything we think we know about the boundaries between life and death, between science and faith, between what we can explain and what we must simply witness in awe. Maybe that's the real miracle. Not just that Sarah survived, but that her survival opened up new possibilities for everyone who witnessed it. That it cracked open closed minds and hardened hearts. That it reminded a room full of medical professionals that sometimes, just sometimes, the most important medicine is wonder. If you've ever struggled with questions of faith and science, if you've ever witnessed something you couldn't explain, or if you're simply curious about the mysteries that still exist in our modern world, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, share your experiences, and if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because there are more incredible true stories like this one coming your way. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remain open to the impossible, because as Dr. Marcus Chen learned on a cold November night, impossible things happen every day. We just have to be willing to see them.